Okay, let's look at a lot of people's favourites there. There's two outright favourites with bookmakers at the moment. They are England and France, who obviously knocked England out of the World Cup in Qatar, got to the final in very dramatic fashion. They're looking to lift another trophy, of course. And again, another side that we've seen a lot of changes to the squad. One stands out as a lack of change, and N'Golo Kante is back, which is, I think, is a really interesting decision considering the move to Saudi. But defensively, we're looking at a very different France side. But that young talent just keeps coming through, doesn't it, Dave? Are France and their depth still at that elite level that we've seen them at in previous tournaments?
It's a joke, isn't it? You look through that squad and every name's got an argument to be in the first 11. They're that good. You mentioned some of the young talent they've got. They've still got some very experienced players in there, like Giroud, who, it'd be interesting to see if he can still do it. Because for me, he also changed the game against England at the last tournament. He's shown that he can still be a key player. But then, some of that talent, like you mentioned, Barcola as well, I think looks really promising. PSG is obviously in there. I think they've just got these players who can decide moments at any time. And rightly, they should be one of the favourites. I think they ought to have had their super engine, haven't they? And I think they've given France are actually second favourites behind England, 19.1%.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which I thought was really fascinating, actually. It's got to be probably one of the first times England have been favourites for a tournament as well.
What I find really interesting, Dave, is you're talking about France and their difference makers, and you're yet to mention Real Madrid's new man. So obviously 25-year-old Kylian Mbappé has finally got his move to Real Madrid. Does that do him good or bad for this tournament? Is there a bit of a betrayal feeling from the Paris-based players, or is there an uplift in him and his spirits because he's finally got that move? Is it enough to motivate him?
They've got to have seen it coming, haven't they? This has been a long time coming. So I don't think it would cause any disruption within that squad. We've seen some quite comical times with this France team in the past, with some arguments and disruption during big tournaments. But I can't see it. I think, I think the reason I didn't mention him is because I'm a little bit bitter and probably a little bit jealous of Real Madrid getting a player like Mbappé in through the door. And we know how good he is. We don't really need to mention. You run out of superlatives at the end of the day. But we saw it at the last tournament. They were obviously a bit unfortunate, to be honest. But he made a real impact in that. So I'd expect the same, to be honest.
Do you know the one that, for me, that I find really interesting about France? I would say they currently have the best centre-back in the world, and I'm not convinced he's going to start for them. What's the idea between France's centre-back pairing? Because traditionally we've seen Upamecano and Konate there now. Obviously Varane's no longer in the camp. So you'd imagine Saliba gets straight in there, but there's a chance that we won't even see him. Is that just a sign of how good France's depth is, or is that potentially Deschamps overlooking something excellent?
I mean, I know France fans have had the frustrations with Deschamps in the past, haven't they? I think it's difficult to argue against whatever decision he makes, because you look at the centre-backs that they've got, and they've got some players missing in there as well. Look at Kimpembe before he had that terrible injury. He really good centre-backs throughout. Konate, you probably imagine, I think he'll start, to be honest. I'll be surprised if it wasn't Saliba alongside Konate. But
he's always favoured Upamecano, hasn't he? And on his day, is an excellent defender, but has a rick in him. I feel like that's the area. If you're going to get out France, he's the one that you want to attack, really. I think the fullbacks, Theo Hernandez is obviously sensational. They're disappointed to have lost Lucas Hernandez to an injury, but if they can get Saliba in there, he has to, surely, because they'd be missing a world-class talent. Absolutely.
I think there's for sure. I think sometimes with Upamecano, you don't know what to expect, and you do get those performances from him where he looks out of sorts, and I don't think you can afford that. I think Saliba, for me, has got to be the first choice centre back. Especially the progress he's shown.
Agreed.
Over the last couple of years.
So the problem is that if we're talking about how unstoppable France look, how excellent the squad is, the amazing depth that they have, but also saying that they aren't the favourites for the tournament. So where do France fall short. If they do fall short, if they're not going to go on to win it, what is it that stops them from winning it?
I think the only thing for me probably is whether Giroud can still do it and whether they've got a striker in there who can actually consistently score goals for them, and whether they're not consistently relying on Mbappe as well. I think that's probably the only thing for me. I think they're too good all over the pitch, and I think it's just one of those teams as well where when you do come up against them, you kind of almost have to hope for a little bit of an off day and look for those very small weaknesses in the, like you mentioned, in the back line. Upamecano, I think, is probably a play you would look to target if you're another team.
So where have you got them?
I've got them in the semis, but I don't know whether it's my head or my heart for England to actually beat them.
Yeah, I had the same thing. I had them getting to the semis and losing to England, but I don't know. When I think about that game, I don't know how England win it, but there's just something that tells me that England are going to go the other way, and if they're going to, then they've got to beat everyone in front of them. So they've got to have something that gets them through. But yeah, I had semi-finals as well.